Inside Alcatraz, the untold stories of America's most infamous prison. If you're new to the channel, step into the shadows with us. Like, subscribe, and tell us what you think below. Your voice helps us uncover the stories the world tried to bury. The night the sirens began, the whole island seemed to hold its breath. It was just past 1 a.m., the hour when even Alcatraz usually went quiet. But on this night, long before the guards understood what they were hearing, a frantic alarm cut through the cold wind racing over the water. Flashlights snapped on. Boots thundered across the concrete. Something, or someone, had broken the rules of this island prison where nothing was ever supposed to happen without force, fear, or permission from steel bars. A young guard named Thomas Hale was the first to reach the end of the tier. His hands were shaking, not from fear but from something deeper, something he could never talk about outside these walls. He swung his flashlight toward the cell that had triggered the alarm. Inside, the bed was perfectly made, the way inmates were required to leave it each morning. The pillow was shaped just right. The blanket was pulled tight. At a glance, it looked like the prisoner was asleep. But Hale's light caught something strange. A crack. A seam. A place where the darkness didn't sit the way it should. He stepped closer, heart pounding, and gently tapped the pillow. It made a hollow sound. He ripped the thin blanket away and froze. The face staring back wasn't a face at all. It was a painted head made of plaster and soap, with real human hair glued to the top. Its eyes were blobs of painted darkness. Its mouth was carved into a blank, silent line. And the real inmate? He was nowhere to be seen. Hale stumbled backward, instantly calling on his radio. The hallway exploded with noise. Guards shouted. Cells rattled awake. Men who spent every night dreaming of escape suddenly lifted their heads, listening. Even in the dim light, everyone could feel it. The impossible had happened. Someone had tried to get out of Alcatraz. Someone who wasn't supposed to even breathe without a guard knowing. As the chaos spread, Hale noticed something else. A vent cover lying loosely on the floor. A hole carved behind the sink, rough and jagged like it had been scraped inch by inch over months. Cold air rolled out from the darkness inside the wall. It looked like a tunnel. A tight one. A desperate one. But big enough for a determined man to slip through. And this wasn't just any man. This was Frank Morris, the quiet, sharp-eyed inmate who never spoke unless he needed to. A man who seemed to watch everything. A man who carried himself like he already had one foot outside these walls. The warden arrived minutes later, his jaw tight, his coat half-buttoned from rushing out of bed. His eyes darted from the vent to the fake head to the empty cell. "Search every inch," he barked. "Nobody gets off this island. Not alive." But as the guards rushed toward the utility corridor behind the cells, the warden whispered something under his breath, something only Hale seemed close enough to hear. He shouldn't have been able to do this. The investigation began immediately, racers of suspicion flicking from cell to cell. The men locked inside watched silently. Some looked curious, some amused, and some looked terrified as if they knew this escape attempt was just the beginning of something bigger. Hale kept replaying the sight of that plaster head. Someone had sculpted it carefully, almost lovingly. Someone had shaved hair from God knows where to make it look real. That wasn't last-minute panic. That was planning. Hours later, the sun began to rise over the bay, painting the water with pale gold. But inside Alcatraz, the light didn't feel warm. It felt thinner, like something had been stolen from the island during the night. Hale moved with the search team into the utility corridor behind the cells. Dust clung to the air. Old pipes groaned overhead. And on the floor lay bits of concrete, a small homemade chisel, and a torn scrap of raincoat rubber. A raft. Or at least pieces of one. One of the older guards swore under his breath. If they made it to the water, they're done. Nobody survives that current. But Hale wasn't convinced. He kept noticing tiny details the others missed. Marks on the pipe walls. Greasy fingerprints along the edge of a support beam. And something else. Footprints in the dust. 3 sets. All heading the same direction. Morris hadn't been alone. While the search expanded to the shoreline, word spread among the prisoners. Men whispered through cell bars, passing theories like contraband. Most believed the ocean swallowed the escapees. Others claimed they saw shadows slip into the water long before the sirens. A few swore they heard quiet splashes in the darkness, splashes that didn't sound like drowning men but swimmers. Inside the warden's office, the atmosphere grew tense. He questioned every guard on duty. He demanded reports, schedules, explanations for every small action. His face grew more strained with each answer. When he finally spoke to Hale, his voice sounded unusually tight. "You were the first one there. Did you see anything that might explain how they pulled this off? Hale told him everything. About the fake head, the vent, the footprints, the raft materials. The warden nodded slowly, then leaned forward. Listen carefully. This cannot leave this room. Not one word. His eyes sharpened. This is not the first time someone tried to break out of this place. But this is the smartest attempt we've seen. And if the public thinks anyone got off this rock, even for a moment, it destroys everything Alcatraz stands for. There it was, the truth nobody wanted to say out loud. Alcatraz wasn't just a prison. It was a symbol. A warning. A place meant to show the world that the worst men in America could be controlled. And now, one of those men might be gone. Hale walked out of the office feeling the weight of something he couldn't fully explain. The silence of the corridors felt different. He noticed how some prisoners stared at him with new eyes, curious, calculating, hopeful. He noticed how some guards avoided meeting his gaze, as if they were afraid of what this escape attempt meant for all of them. Late that afternoon, while the search teams dragged boats through the icy waters and helicopters scanned the shoreline, Hale returned to the abandoned escape route. He wanted to understand what had pushed Morris to take such a risk. As he studied the rough edges of the hole in the wall, something shiny caught his eye. A small metal object wedged between two pipes. He reached in carefully and pulled it free. It was a key. Rusted, but unmistakably shaped like one of the early model Alcatraz utility keys. No inmate should have had this. And if Morris had it, someone inside must have helped him. Hale stared at the key, his heart thudding hard in his chest. This escape wasn't just clever. It wasn't just desperate. It might have been an inside job. Footsteps sounded behind him. Hale quickly slipped the key into his pocket and turned. Another guard approached. They found something, the man said. Down by the shoreline. Hale's throat tightened. What did they find? The guard swallowed. You should come see it for yourself. But Hale already knew, whatever weighted down there wasn't going to give answers. It was going to make everything much, much worse. And as he followed the guard toward the water, Hale felt the key pressing softly against his leg, a cold, metallic reminder that someone within these walls had broken the one rule everyone swore to uphold. Nobody leaves Alcatraz. Nobody. Yet someone had. And the only question now was who else knew the truth. The shoreline of Alcatraz was always cold, but today the wind felt sharper, like it was trying to push the truth back into the water. Hale followed the guard down the rocky slope, his boots slipping on wet stone. Search teams stood in clusters along the edge, their faces pale and tight. Nobody spoke as he approached. That silence alone told him something was wrong. Two officers stepped aside, revealing a torn piece of rubber washed up against the rocks. It was dark, wrinkled, and soaked through with seawater. Hale knelt and lifted it carefully. It felt like the same material he saw earlier behind the cells, raincoat rubber stitched crudely by hand. But this piece was different. It had markings on it. 3 faint letters scraped into the surface as if made by a nail or a shard of metal. Ong. Hale didn't need the rest. Anglin. One of the brothers. John or Clarence. Both had vanished with Morris. The warden arrived moments later. His eyes narrowed when he saw the scrap. I want every inch of this shoreline searched again. He paused, jaw tightening. And nobody reports this. We don't confirm anything until we have bodies. The word hung in the air like a shadow. Bodies. As if that was the only acceptable proof that the island hadn't failed. Hale looked at the ocean. The water churned in strong, unpredictable patterns, the kind that could swallow a man in minutes. But something about this escape didn't feel like a suicide mission. It felt methodical, focused, calculated. He stepped back from the edge, thinking of the key hidden in his pocket. Someone had helped them. He felt it in his bones. Later that afternoon, Hale walked the tier again, studying each inmate closely. Some looked unsettled. Others amused. A few were whispering behind their hands. But one man caught his eye, Robert Stroud, the infamous Birdman. He sat calmly at his desk, head bowed, writing something on a small notepad. Hale paused outside his cell. Long day, he said, trying to sound casual. Stroud didn't look up. It always is on this island. You hear about the escape? Hale asked. Stroud set his pencil down slowly, then turned to face him. His eyes were sharp, dark, and unreadable. Everyone hears everything in here. Sound moves differently through steel. You know Morris? Hale asked. Stroud gave a thin smile. Everyone knows Morris. Some more than others. Hale studied him carefully. Meaning? Meaning, Stroud said gently, if you want to know what a man is capable of, you don't watch what he does. You watch what he doesn't do. Before Hale could respond, another guard called him down the corridor. Stroud's voice followed him like a quiet echo. "Be careful, Officer Hale. Sometimes the ones who talk the least leave the biggest mess behind." The entire prison felt different that night. Tense. Watching. Waiting. Hale tried to focus on his rounds, but his mind kept drifting to the key. He replayed every guard he had ever worked with, every shift change, every moment when something didn't feel quite right. Around midnight, rain began to fall. Thin sheets of water traced down the windows, turning the lights of San Francisco into blurry specks in the distance. Hale walked past the workshop area, the sound of dripping water echoing under the metal roof. He paused when he noticed the door slightly open. That door was supposed to stay locked. He drew in a slow breath and pushed it wider. The room was dark except for a faint glow from a small lamp left on a bench. Tools lay scattered, sawdust clinging to the floor. At first it looked like any other night shift clutter. But then he saw it, a section of pipe laid across the table, cut open. Inside were scraps of metal, shavings, and something else that made his pulse jump. A small hollow space carved into the pipe's interior. A hiding place. He glanced around the room. Anyone could have used this. Any inmate who had access. Any guard who knew the blind spots. Hale stepped closer and saw something half buried in the shavings. A slip of paper. He picked it up carefully. The pencil marks were faint, almost smudged away by the dust. But he could still read it. Portage Point. Hale's heartbeat kicked up. Portage Point was a small, quiet spot on the mainland shoreline. Completely unremarkable. Almost nobody knew about it, unless they'd been studying maps of the bay. This wasn't random. It was a clue. Or a destination. A sudden voice echoed behind him. "What are you doing here, Hale?" He turned sharply. A senior guard named Monroe stood in the doorway, his silhouette outlined by the hallway light. Monroe's face was hard to read, neutral, maybe too neutral. He wasn't supposed to be here either. He was supposed to be on the opposite end of the prison. "Found the door open," Hale said calmly. "Thought I should check it out." Monroe stepped closer, eyes drifting to the table. "You see anything interesting?" Hale slipped the note into his pocket. "Just a mess someone didn't clean up." Monroe stared at him for several long seconds. "You should head back to your rounds. This place is off limits after hours." Hale nodded and walked past him, forcing himself not to look back. Only when he reached the far end of the corridor did he let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. Something wasn't right with Monroe. He was too calm, too watchful, and he had shown up far too quickly. Back in the dimly lit guard office, Hale unfolded the note again. Portage Point. A key. A torn piece of raft. 3 missing inmates. And a senior guard who appeared in places he shouldn't be. Pieces of a puzzle were forming, slowly, painfully, but every new piece made the picture darker. By morning, news reporters swarmed the shoreline around the bay. Boats patrolled the waters. Helicopters circled. But there was still no sign of the escapees. No bodies. No debris beyond the torn raincoat scrap. Nothing that confirmed a success or a failure. And as the warden addressed the search teams with a composed exterior, Hale noticed something in the man's eyes, a flicker of fear. Not fear of the escape itself, but fear of what it might reveal. At noon, the warden pulled Hale into his office. Papers lay scattered across his desk. Phone lines buzzed with calls from Washington. "We're shutting down all communication about this escape," he said firmly. "From today forward, you don't speak about this outside these walls. Not to the guards. Not to the press. Not to anyone." Hale nodded. "Understood." The warden leaned back, studying him. "You were the first to discover the cell. That makes you part of this story whether you want to be or not. So listen carefully, someone helped those men. From inside." His eyes hardened. "And if we don't find out who, this prison loses everything." Hale left the office with a storm inside his chest. He didn't know who to trust anymore. Not the inmates. Not the guards. Not even the system he was supposed to uphold. That night, as he walked past the same corridor where he'd found the hidden pipe, something on the floor caught his attention. A small puddle of muddy water, the kind that didn't come from a leaking pipe or rain. It came from outside. Someone had been there again. Hale crouched, touching the edge of the puddle with the tip of his finger. It was cold. Fresh. And as he stood, he noticed something even more disturbing. A muddy footprint. Small. But not as small as an inmate's slipper print. A guard's boot. Hale followed the faint marks until they disappeared behind the storage room door. He reached for the handle, but before he could turn it, the overhead lights flickered once. Twice. Then went dark, throwing the corridor into complete silence. And then he heard it. A soft, steady breathing just behind the door. Waiting. The breathing on the other side of the door was calm, steady, and much too deliberate. Hale stood frozen in the dark, every instinct warning him not to move. The silence inside the corridor felt deeper now, like the island itself was waiting for whatever came next. He slowly reached for his flashlight, careful not to make noise, but before he could switch it on, the door creaked open an inch. A thin line of light split the darkness, spilling over the floor. Hale stepped back, ready to defend himself, but the figure that emerged held up one hand in a quiet, almost pleading gesture. "Don't shout," Monroe whispered. Hale lowered his flashlight but didn't relax. "Why are you sneaking around? Why are you in here?" Monroe glanced down the hall, making sure they were alone. His voice dropped even lower. "You think you're the only one who noticed something is wrong? You're not." He swallowed hard. "But you need to understand, this island, it's not just a prison. It's a secret. One that some people will do anything to protect." Hale's jaw tightened. "Did you help the prisoners escape?" "No," Monroe said quickly. "But someone with more authority than you or me did. And they don't want anyone digging into it." He ran a hand across his face. This wasn't meant to get this far. Before Hale could speak, a loud clang echoed from the far end of the corridor. Both men snapped toward the sound. It wasn't an inmate. It wasn't a guard. It was something else moving in the shadows, fast and purposeful. Monroe stiffened. "We need to leave. Now." But Hale didn't move. He stepped forward instead, shining his flashlight down the hallway. The beam landed on something metallic lying on the floor. A key ring. But not just any ring. This one held 3 keys, each tagged with a number. Utility keys. Access to restricted rooms. Access to the roofs. Access to the shoreline gates. Hale crouched beside them, his breath tight in his chest. Whoever dropped these had power. Real power. "We should turn those in," Monroe whispered. Hale ignored him and picked the keys up carefully. "Who were you meeting in that room?" Monroe's jaw clenched. "You're asking the wrong questions." "No," Hale said quietly. "I'm asking the right ones." Suddenly the lights flickered back on, bright, harsh, blinding. Monroe shielded his eyes. Hale stayed focused. Someone was playing with the circuit board. Someone who knew exactly which corridors to cut power to and when to return it. Someone watching them. Monroe stepped closer. "Listen to me, Hale. The warden isn't telling you everything. He's meeting with people from the mainland. Not investigators. Not federal agents. People who shouldn't even be here. And whatever they're talking about, it's not about finding Morris. Or the Anglins." The corridor phone rang abruptly, the shrill sound slicing through the tense silence. Hale and Monroe exchanged a look. That phone wasn't supposed to ring unless there was an emergency. Hale picked it up. "This is Hale." A voice crackled through, low and steady. "Stop searching." Hale frowned. "Who is this?" "You don't need to know," the voice replied. "Just drop the investigation and walk away. For your sake." Hale's grip tightened. "What happened to the missing inmates?" A long pause. "They're gone. Let it stay that way." Then the line went dead. Monroe stared at him. "Who was it?" "Someone who wants to stay invisible," Hale murmured. He felt the cold metal of the key in his pocket pressing against his leg. Morris' stolen key, the one Hale had found behind the pipes. Now he held 3 more. That made 4 keys total. 4 pieces of evidence linking the escape not just to inmates, but to people who controlled these grounds. People who walked these halls freely. People who were trusted. Hale turned to Monroe. "You said the warden is meeting with people. Where?" Monroe exhaled shakily. "Lower administrative wing. Behind the old record storage. There's a room nobody uses anymore. Take me there." Monroe hesitated. "If we go down there, if we see what's happening, there's no going back." Hale pocketed the keys. "I think going back isn't an option anymore." They moved through the corridors quietly, avoiding the main guard lines. Hale kept replaying everything in his head. The plaster head, the vent, the pipe hiding place, the note marked portage point. The torn raft scrap. The warden's unspoken fear. And now this, organized sabotage, timed power cuts, dropped keys and threats over the phone. Something about the escape didn't add up. It wasn't just an inmate operation. It wasn't even a small inside job. It felt bigger. Older. More dangerous. They reached a narrow stairwell leading underground. The air grew colder with each step. Hale heard voices echoing ahead, muffled but intense. Monroe grabbed his sleeve. "You don't want to be seen down here." Hale nodded and stayed behind a concrete pillar while Monroe peeked around the corner. After a moment he motioned Hale forward. Through the cracked door, Hale saw a dimly lit room with a large table in the center. Maps of the bay were pinned to the walls. Red lines traced currents, shoreline points, and tide patterns. And standing around the table were 5 men, 3 in uniforms Hale didn't recognize, 1 in a suit, and the warden himself. The men in uniform weren't prison guards. They were military. Hale strained to hear their conversation. "Cannot let this information become public," the man in the suit was saying. "If it does, this entire structure loses its legitimacy." The warden nodded. "We've contained the story so far. No one outside knows anything." "Are you certain?" one of the military men asked. "We heard that a guard was asking questions." "Hale. He's been poking around places he shouldn't." Monroe stiffened and shot Hale a warning look. The warden's expression hardened. "He will be dealt with. He doesn't understand the gravity of the situation." "I hope so," the man in the suit muttered. "Because if the press learns prisoners got help from inside," he leaned forward, "this prison becomes a joke. And everything we've built here collapses." Hale's stomach twisted. They weren't trying to preserve safety. They were trying to preserve an image. A perfect prison. An unbreakable symbol. A place too strong to fail. And the truth, that someone inside these walls had helped the escape, would destroy that symbol. The meeting ended abruptly when one of the men pointed at the door. What was that? Hale and Monroe bolted back into the corridor as the door swung open behind them. Hale didn't wait to see who was chasing them. They sprinted up the stairwell, their footsteps echoing through the narrow shaft. When they reached the top, Monroe shoved Hale into a side hallway. "We split up here. If they catch both of us, the story dies." "What story?" Hale whispered, breathless. "The truth," Monroe said. "They're hiding something about Portage Point. Something connected to those prisoners." Monroe pressed something into Hale's hand. A folded piece of paper. "What is it?" Hale asked. "Coordinates," Monroe said. "A place near the shoreline. If you want answers, go there tonight. Alone." Before Hale could respond, Monroe pushed him toward the opposite hallway and disappeared around the corner as guards rushed past. Back in the safety of his quarters, Hale unfolded the paper. The coordinates led to a small storage alcove near the back of the island, only accessible when the tide dropped. A hidden place. A place no prisoner should know about. Yet Morris had somehow known Portage Point. And now this. As the sun set behind the Golden Gate Bridge, Hale made his way quietly to the isolated path behind the prison. The wind whipped harder now, carrying sea spray against his face. Waves crashed violently against the rocks. But ahead, the shoreline dipped just enough to reveal a narrow ledge. He climbed down carefully, boots sliding on wet stone. When he reached the bottom, he aimed his flashlight into the alcove. At first he saw nothing. Just rocks, seaweed, a rusted piece of metal. Then the beam caught something tucked deep in the shadows. A canvas bag. He dragged it out, heart pounding. Inside were several items. A knife crafted from a spoon handle, scraps of raincoat material, a small jar of glue, and a notebook filled with sketches of the prison layout. Detailed sketches, far more detailed than any inmate should have had access to. And at the bottom, wrapped in cloth, he found a photograph. 3 men standing beside a boat on the mainland. Frank Morris, John Anglin, Clarence Anglin, and a 4th man standing beside them. A man wearing an Alcatraz guard uniform. Hale stared at the picture, unable to breathe. The escape wasn't an inmate plan. It was a collaboration. A partnership. And the guard in the picture. Hale recognized him. Monroe. A sharp sound echoed behind Hale, the crunch of a boot on gravel. He turned slowly. Monroe stepped out of the darkness, his face unreadable. "I told you," Monroe said softly, "this island protects its secrets." Hale held the photograph tight. "Why did you help them?" Monroe stepped closer, the ocean wind whipping his coat. "Because the truth about this place is uglier than any escape could ever be. Morris wasn't trying to destroy the prison. He was trying to expose it." "Expose what?" Hale demanded. Monroe hesitated, just for a moment. And that hesitation was everything. Before he could answer, a spotlight from the tower flared to life above them, sweeping across the rocks and freezing both men in blinding white light. "Halt," a voice boomed. "Hands where we can see them." Monroe's eyes widened. They weren't supposed to find us yet. But the guards were already charging down the slope. Hale stepped backward, clutching the photograph. Monroe reached for him. "Hale, listen to me, don't let them bury." A gunshot cracked through the night. Monroe's body jolted. Hale stared in horror as Monroe fell to his knees, then collapsed against the rocks. Guards swarmed forward. Someone shouted, "Hale, drop the bag." He couldn't move. Not because of fear, because of what Monroe had said. Because of the photo. Because the truth was bigger than a simple escape. A hand seized Hale's shoulder. Someone yanked the bag from his grip. And as they dragged him away from the rocks, Hale saw Monroe's hand lying still beside him, the tide slowly pulling toward the alcove where the secrets were kept. The last thing Hale saw before the world went dark was the torn canvas bag being passed between officers who looked far too calm. As if they had been waiting for this moment. As if they already knew exactly what needed to disappear next.